Hey, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Clinic Gym Radio. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Josh Satterlee, and it's my pleasure today to be joined by Dr. Joe Lavacca. Did I say that right, Joe?
You did indeed, Josh. Very happy to be here. I greatly appreciate your time, and to everyone that's listening, thanks for following along.
Absolutely. Now, those listening might hear some background noise, and that's because Joe believes in the clinic gym model. He is a clinician, a PT. But that means that people doing gym stuff around you and next to you and behind you, unfortunately, gym stuff oftentimes is loud, right? So we might have to just know that that's because this dude is in the trenches, baby. He's delivering the care as we speak. So, yeah. So, Joe, you are a PT by trade, and you believe in strength, fitness, exercise, et cetera. Give us a little synopsis of like what your clinical practice looks like.
Yeah. So my clinical practice has definitely changed over the last 10 to 12 years, like I think it should for all of us. Being in New York City, it was very easy to get sucked into the physician-owned model, very easy to get sucked into the every 15 minutes, if you're lucky, sort of model. Walking out, leaving completely burnt out, not knowing which way was up, who I helped, what did I do that day?
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough when my daughter was born to link up with a couple of my close friends out here in the city. I got my first taste of what out of network, one-on-one physical therapy for an hour could look like. And I was like, wow, I was missing a lot of stuff, not paying attention to people and sitting down and learning communication strategies with them a little bit more. And also just having the time to be able to hand them a kettlebell that matched their effort level, rather than the 3 to 5 pound dumbbells, yellow TheraBands that I was stuck with and everywhere else I was working at that
TheraBand
time.
That you can see through it when it's stretched because it's so thin. And you're like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, and of course I was working on 3 sets of 10, which I never knocked 3 sets of 10. I think 3 sets of 10 is a strength protocol, right? But for all intents and purposes, when people can do 30 in a row, and then we're looking at me like, what's next on the strength protocol? And I was like, let's do another 30 in a row of these. I knew it was time to sort of make the change, right? So, so I actually started my own practice as funny enough, having gotten fired from a job I took during my divorce, and sort of like a way to change things up a little bit, going through some personal changes. It seemed like professional change at the time was going to be something that was going to be good for me. Unfortunately, when I jumped ship from my friends and got back into another out-of-network practice, I wasn't willing to go along with some of the more unethical and sort of shady things that they were doing with billing and note-taking and treatment. So when we butt heads,
certainly nobody that's listening to this podcast has ever struggled with some of those things thrust upon them. So yeah. No, but I think there's a lot of folks listening that can totally jive with this message of like getting forced in these bad ecosystems, and you can be a great provider in a bad ecosystem and you'll look like a bad provider.
Oh yeah, totally. And that's what it was, right? Like I was singled out. Patients sort of started complaining about me because I wasn't going along with what was traditional care there, or what they thought was traditional care there. And I guess we just butted heads one too many times, and I got called into the office. And I remember this because it was my daughter's 4th birthday. And I got fired on her 4th birthday. And I was like, oh man, this is not going to be good. Maybe I got to return that gift I got her, right?
Exactly.
Every cent counts right now. But I actually turned it into the current gym I'm at. They put out a Facebook post that one of their providers was leaving, and they needed someone to sort of take the reins. And literally that day I walked 10 blocks down, knocked on their door, and I said, hey man, good to see you again. I'm back. I just got fired. And I'm ready to rock this and I think run the PT business the way that I think I want it to be run, which is very much focused on, first and foremost, listening to the person in front of you, getting to know them more than just their pain or their diagnosis, finding out what's really important to them rather than thinking that I was the one that was going to be able to fix them all the time and they had to only listen to me. And that's been about 3.5 years now, which was perfect timing for COVID. I just got the ball rolling a little bit and then, felt pretty confident at where we were as a business. And then we got shut down for 6 months and like everybody else did.
So what you're saying, it's been a smooth road with no struggles to get to this point.
Oh man, I would do it again 100 times, right?
Yeah. When people ask you, how'd you get how are you able to do all this? And it's like, a lot of sitting under my desk on a Friday night, crying myself to sleep, rocking in the fetal position. But besides that.
Yeah, exactly. Not knowing what where the next friend check is coming from,
Yeah.
But,
I totally dig the idea of patient communication. We're actually doing some work in the patient communication realm and hope to launch some education around it in the future, because whether you're trying to get people into, from a clinic into a gym, or you're trying to get your gym members to complete a weight loss program, or you're trying to get people in active rehab to make their appointments and everything, it does not matter what you're trying to do. Communication is at the centerpiece of all that. I mean, we call it different things: marketing, patient education, compliance, weight loss, motivation. It's all communication, right? It's all based around that. Yeah. So absolutely. I love that fact. Now, one of the things you and I were talking about is, when we look at that whole person, we got to communicate with this human being that's in front of us, a being, not just a low back condition, right? It's like, hey, I have low back, and I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I have XYZ, all these things. One thing that I know you've gotten into, because we interviewed one of your homies, which was Allison Evans with Fringe, but you are a large part in this, I don't know what you say, launch of Fringe CBD products.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And can you take us, how did you kind of, I think a lot of listeners are going, hey man, I'd be, if they stepped into your clinic, most of the people listening could probably blend right in with, like, the rehab involves kettlebells. There's a gym right next door. We're doing hands-on care. We're doing exercise. Like, if they put on your uniform, it would fit right in. But not everybody listening uses CBD, right?
Sure.
So how did you first get exposed to it, and why'd you kind of jam on that as a I don't want to say a treatment modality, but like as a supportive part of treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's such a great question. And this has probably been the number one thing that I've noticed.
I only ask great questions. Like, you ask anybody around me. No.
Look, that's why you have the reputation, man. So what really was interesting was Allison, whom I know you know well, reached out to me a few years ago and was like, hey, I'd like you to start doing some research on CBD products for me. What do you know about it? And my answer was absolutely nothing. And she said, great, that's basically what I know about it too. Let's learn together. Let's start doing some research. Let's start pooling the thing, because I think this is going to be a really big opportunity for a lot of clinics going forward.
So you weren't using them in your practice. You were straight out of, like, what does the research tell us? It could have told you, like, hey, rub them inside of your left earlobe only, and you guys would have gone forward with that.
100%. I had no history with it. Cool. And I was sort of taken aback when I learned more of the history of the cannabis plant in general, throughout society, and the politicalization of it and the stigmatization of it at that as well. And I would recommend this wonderful book for anyone who's just sort of interested in the whole cannabis story. This wonderful book called Smoke Signals basically goes through the beginning of time, or what we know about cannabis from, a few thousand years ago, almost to every single court battle and legal battle up until today. It's very well done. But by the time I was done reading that book, I realized, wow, there was sort of no reason to ban, outlaw, arrest, criminalize this plant that had basically been a part of human existence across cultures and across continents since really 5,000 BC potentially, right? So that sort of gave me a little bit of a pause, because, here we are as a society sort of glorifying happy hour, where people will go and, basically just drink poison for fun. I have not read one good research article on alcohol to date, and yet we still are sort of okay with that, right? Up until recently, I think everyone in New York City was still getting cigarette breaks. We know that there has not been any good research on smoking. Yet when I've brought up the idea of CBD to even my parents, I was like, hey, Mom, Dad, this might be something you guys want to look into. And my mom's first response was, I'm not getting into drugs, and neither are you, And I was like, yeah, that's definitely the response that a couple of my patients have been giving me, because they think that CBD and THC, or let's say, the slang marijuana, are all the same thing, and they're really not. And I think that's what was the most interesting thing for me to discover. Number one, the longstanding medicinal practices, religious practice, social practices of the plant itself. And then how, look, there's always going to be, I think, people who take things to the extreme, right? Mm-hmm. People drink too much and they drive. People smoke too much and they end up with.
Hey, brother, I, as I said before we started this interview, like, I'm a chiropractor by license. Like, there are people who have let the world know they're chiropractors in a way that I'm like, please don't ever open your mouth again to say anything about your license. I would pay you to shut up, Yeah. So I've seen it in my own, professional life.
Yeah. So, reading up about it and then starting to just sort of, now the thing about the research is it's tough, right? And I'll be the first to admit that. And I think that the reason that it's tough is that we have a lot of growing evidence on preclinical data. And for, those not familiar with the term preclinical, or maybe there's some newer listeners out there, preclinical data is a lot of just animal models or animal studies. So we can extrapolate to a human potentially that this stuff is safe for me and you, but if you dose a mouse, it won't be the same as dosing an adult man, right? So we're going to have to take that in consideration. The other thing that's a little bit confusing about the research, because cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, according to the United States government, it's very hard to get funding for good quality research, and no one really wants to touch it yet until it sort of gets off that list, right? And just as a fun fact, crack cocaine is a Schedule II substance, and marijuana is still listed as a Schedule I. So it actually be easier, Josh, to do studies on crack than it would be on CBD and THC still in this country right now, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah. Well, listen, I always look at other markets, like how things have changed. And, I live in Las Vegas, right? Gambling is our number one industry here. And for the longest time, the idea of sports betting, the longest time we were told you can't have a Vegas-based professional team because of sports betting, because you allow sports betting, right? We got hockey. Nobody cared.
That worked out well.
Now we have football. Nobody cares. And now DraftKings, FanDuel, everybody else has expanded to everywhere. And so the idea of sports betting, which was like oh my God, don't ever do it, got reduced because one of the things that, I don't know if you saw that research for the state of New Jersey, but they said if you look at games of chance as a marker for we don't allow people to play these, then you would have to stop allowing people to invest in the New York Stock Exchange, because it is more of a game of chance than poker, sports betting, horse racing, all these things. It's more chancy, because a tweet comes out from the CEO of something and the stock bombs, and it's like, nobody could have predicted it. Unbelievable. Yeah. And with that kind of logic, it's kind of similar to what you're saying, right? Everybody's like, oh, any game of chance is bad. It's like, well, we're doing this thing over here that's not, that's sanctioned. And I think you have that Venn diagram of THC and CBD are overlapping. And in the next few years, obviously they're going to separate and be like, the plant is the same, but the end product is very different. We need to treat it that way and talk about it differently.
Sure. Absolutely. And then, you sort of even think about it from a regulation standpoint. One other thing we mentioned is, you can go to, some bookie on the street and, throw down a $20 bet and hope that you see him again to get your money back, assuming that he didn't run off somewhere. That's sort of like the CBD space right now. You go to a gas station and wow, hot damn, I got some CBD pills there for $5.99. Why would I go online to Fringe or Charlotte's Web or one of these other companies and spend $60, $70, $80? And the reasoning behind it is because there's only a very few companies that will do 3-level third-party testing, where you get it tested as soon as it gets pulled off as a crop, right? Yeah. Where you get it tested again when you go through the sort of emulsification process, and then when you test it again, but as it's getting loaded up onto the trucks, right? Like, you want to guarantee that people are buying what they want to buy, and because things are so unregulated, well, me and you could probably throw some flour in a packet, call it CBD, and no one would really be able to regulate us for a really, really long time, right? So I think it's the other thing that sort of created this, mistrust is people just don't know what they're actually getting for their money. So it's really important, just like you would go search out someone like yourself or hopefully someone like me, you want to make sure that you're getting a return on investment. And, this is
I remember reading when I was in college, I read like a Consumer Reports or something because, I was a dork and didn't like girls or something. But but I remember reading a Consumer Reports, and it was about creatine monohydrate, and it listed the top 20 brands by sales. And one of the two things that I remember from that study, number one was the Costco brand, the Kirkland Signature, was actually like third on the list, and their highest recommendation based on price for how much you got per serving per dollar. And I was like, that's awesome. And there was a little note, like it was something like the 20 top, brands. And they had a little note at the bottom, like 7 of our test bottles did not contain any material that we could recognize. So it's like, you're telling me that 1/3 of the top 20 basically don't even contain any creatine?
Oh, dude,
I think you guys are in the same kind of market. Yeah.
Same thing. And the FDA just went in and did their own study. I think it was in 2018, very similar, and found that over 1/3 of the products they tested either didn't have CBD content or as much as it was labeled. And then shockingly, another 1/3 actually had high levels of THC in it. So not only were people just either not going through the whole process or just weren't caring to, but now they're dosing you up with THC, which could potentially be the exact thing that clients are not searching for. Right now, I think ultimately what will probably end up happening or what our vision is that there's probably going to be some sort of a benefit that we'll see come out where it's a mixture of a very low dose of THC and CBD that sort of gives you the max therapeutic potential, right? Especially when it comes to maybe pain modulation, stress management, sleep management, because I think a lot of that psychosocial component of how people give different expectations and interpretations to pain, how people sort of like will harp on their stress over and over and over again, and now turn that into this anxiety or this depression around it, and then putting so much emphasis or stress on themselves just to sleep. Right. So I do think that this sort of the THC, the mild THC component to help with that sort of maybe even neuromodulation will be beneficial for the people who can tolerate it. Right. Yeah. And then there'll be some people who don't want to do that or who don't want to tolerate it. And that's where we need just better research as a whole on CBD itself.
I mean, you think about something as simple as like aspirin that's been around for a cajillion years. And, when you're talking about high quality research, like there was a point where aspirin had to get accepted. Then you start a bevy of them talking about dosage, like 81.5 is safe for kids and still analgesic. 100 milligrams, we start seeing too many risk factors. Like where's that standard deviation line? Yeah. And I look, 81.5 milligrams is such a random
so specific
amount,
too, right?
But then you and I take aspirin and it's like, oh, we can get, I can't remember what it is, 325 milligrams, right?
Yeah.
But they're like, hey, at 500 milligrams, you have problems. Like, we're not even at that point because you're saying, like, what you're saying is that the restrictions are so heavy. It's like, is it okay to even test it, let alone 25 milligrams versus 75 versus 100 versus 300? Like, there are decades for that to occur.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, can I ask a question, though, real quick? For those listening that are like, that are kind of in whose practices might be very similar to yours, where like, hey, I see people every day that are, they're gorked up on caffeine and bang energy and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're sleeping too little. They're eating too much. They're working out too little, right? They're like, sometimes I think like trying to call, as you said, neuromodulation is like trying to boil the ocean. Like there's so much in society working against us. It's just like, how could you possibly do that? But maybe guide us through so far. And I know we're on the front edge of this, but where have you learned that this really makes sense for a patient, a conversation with a patient? So somebody comes in with low back pain. Let's just go from there. Where have you found a perfect fit?
Absolutely. So what I learned from, again, starting this in June, and I think I've always sort of said this to classes that I've taught, because I've been teaching for such a long time, where you learn something new, you acquire something new, and your first instinct is just try it on everybody, right? And I think that what I would suggest, or what I did with CBD in my practice, was not actually trying it with the current people I was already seeing for a prolonged period of time, right? And the reason why I did that was because I already had such a relationship with them. Like, I felt that giving them something else would probably have been like, oh, I trust Joe. Sure, let me take this. He's a good guy. He makes me laugh. He's been working with me for 6 or 8 weeks. And if they started taking the CBD, would I've been getting false positives, right? So my suggestion for people wanting to learn more about CBD or incorporating into their practice is start with new people on your schedule. How I sort of started to approach the conversation with the CBD is I follow people through their history, right? So I'm just sort of a guide. I'm just sort of leading them down their way. I never once since June have said, I think CBD would be a great thing for you. So what I do is I sort of model it off of our fringe education system. Our fringe education system has really harped on 3 main tenets where we wanted to focus for whole person health. One is pain, one is stress, one is sleep. Now, I think collectively we can all say we can do better with all of those things. But I think it's really important for a patient to identify that, yeah, my pain is the biggest thing that's causing a limitation in my life, right? Some people aren't really concerned about their pain. They just want to come in, make sure they're okay. I had a couple of people on my schedule this week. They were like, my hip felt a little funny. I don't think it's anything, but it doesn't actually hurt anymore. I just wanted you to take a look at it because my friend said you're very open and you're very honest. So for someone like that, I'm not going to say, hey, well, I got this great CBD cream. It's going to keep your pain at bay, because those type of people aren't going to be, I think, maybe the type of market we would be searching for. So when I have a person with low back pain come in, like your example was, I ask them very specifically, what are they on? And, typically they'll say some sort of combination. Maybe it's Advil if we're lucky, right? In today's day and age, you never really know. And now we got a fire engine coming around the outside.
That's that honorary fire truck drive-by I ordered, in honor of how great of an interview you are, Joe. Yeah. I was trying to get the flyover from the Blue Angels, but it was a little too pricey. So
yeah. Well, I appreciate it, just especially given our first interaction. Maybe for episode 2, we can do the flyover.
Yeah, a helicopter we'll start with, but fighter jets.
Yeah. So I do apologize for that. That's Fifth Avenue, New York City for you. But so with patients who are sort of on something already, I ask them, has it been giving them the relief they are hoping for? And a lot of times their answer is no, or I don't know. So it becomes habitual with a lot of people. And this is something that Jo Marchand, I believe is her name, pointed out a lot in the book called Cure, which was basically looking at placebo-based interventions for people's healthcare. And when things sort of become a ritual, people are just doing them to do them. And if they don't know why they're doing them anymore, I don't know what value they have anymore. And like you're just mentioning, there's probably this okay dose for Advil for a certain period of time. And then when does it become not such a great dose for Advil over a period of time? So if they're first to say, I have been taking something, I'm not sure if it's working, and I haven't been tracking it, I would then start the conversation to say, well, have you tried anything related to CBD before? Because there is some promising things coming out now, some stuff on animals, emerging stuff on humans, but it's still in its infancy. And I can tell you that it's safe. And we can sort of maybe get you off Advil or off your opioid or off of this if we notice the same response or a better response. So if you're still taking your opioid and you're in pain, well, I know from research that getting you off that opioid is going to be the best thing for you. So if it's just to take something as part of the ritual, and you take 30 milligrams of CBD in your coffee or your tea, and you're like, you know what? My pain still sucks, but it sucked just the same when I was on Advil, when I was on this opioid. Well, now maybe we're taking you off a dependent active ingredient that could cause you harm and replacing it with something that you can still find meaning in, you're still empowered by because you're taking control of something, and we just made it that much maybe more positive for you. So what I've done with the people who are taking things is, can we try to take a CBD packet in the morning or when you're noticing when you're having the most pain, and then wait 30 minutes. if you don't feel anything better in 30 minutes, I'm going to encourage you to take one more, right? And now we're up to 60 milligrams. And then if you still don't feel anything, then that's when you can potentially take your Advil or that pill again. But at least we know we tried a little bit of a dose here. I haven't been recommending anything over like 2 fringe packets at a time, because I also want to take into consideration that this is a financial obligation for people too. Yeah. They're also, they're coming in to see me. They're paying money to see me. And now I'm trying to get them to take a supplement that I think is beneficial for them. But if the beneficial dose was up to 120, 160, 200, 300 milligrams for some people, they'd be spending a lot of money in CBD for a really long time. Now, I don't count people's money. If they can do that, that's great. But I try to sort of also just don't want to keep throwing things at the wall, where it's like, just keep taking more, keep taking more, keep taking more. And then in 3 hours later, their pain rhythm just went down anyway. And they're like, hey, Joe, you know what? 500 milligrams, that was it. You're a genius.
I've got an upset stomach from all the water I drank to consume that many packets, but yeah, I feel great.
Yeah. But so I think, that's how I shy with pain, right? Is I'm going to have them do it in front of their normal medication routine, because I think a lot of that stuff becomes ritual for them. And according to Bill Bryson's book, The Body, there was a physician quoted in there that I think said, most of the pain medication on the market right now works for about 50% of people, if you're lucky, right? And in those 50% of people, it only cuts pain by about 1/4 to 1/7. So you're looking at pain opioids, this and that have spent millions and millions of dollars to get researched and studied, that are only helping half the population that they intended to. And even in the population they're quote unquote helping, it's sort of just taking the edge off, right? It's not even eradicating symptoms. So if that's the best we got, well, then why not switch it out for something that's more natural, that is safe? Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a great approach. And I want to just allow everybody, where can they find information if they're like, hey, I'm down with this, I want to get those packets, et cetera, et cetera. Where can they find information about CBD, specifically fringe?
Yeah. So the easiest thing right now would be to go to the website. That's www.joinfringe.com and sign up for our newsletter. We're still in the process of revamping a lot of things. Mm-hmm. What we've learned as a new company in the CBD space is that it matters very much the words you use when you combine them with the phrase CBD, because we were getting shut down left and right. Marketing things were blocked. So we're sort of in a reshuffle strategy as what is the best opportunity for us to reach a wider audience. And I think what we settled on is just trying to talk to as many people as often as possible.
I think one thing, and I want to do a quick live read here. All right, I'm gonna do my little ad here, and then I'm gonna come back with a thought, because I want everybody to understand. I'm gonna do a tease here. I think it's important to know how you guys are approaching the market, which we'll get to in a second. But real quick, let me talk to everybody about Clinic Gym Connect. Everything we do in medicine, whether it's supplements or care or appointments or even telehealth, doesn't matter. It all centers around communication. And if you want to communicate with your patients at the highest level possible, build trust, build relationships, encourage autonomy, all those things, then you need to communicate with them in the way they communicate with everybody in their life, which is two-way text messaging. Not just sending an announcement text, but two-way text messaging conversations. The great news is we have a solution with Clinic Gym Connect. So if you go to clinicgymconnect.com, you'll see how you can integrate two-way text messaging to your daily care. We can also run automations, automatically send videos. We can help with your marketing by having automations and processes set up, sending out videos like a CRM, a customer relationship management software. So check out clinicgymconnect.com, where we can help you communicate the way that your patients already are communicating with everybody else in the world, which is two-way text communication. So with that, let's get back to Joe. Joe, obviously I'm down with the patient communication thing, but the point I wanted to bring up before we went to that little read was this. There's an old saying, we are always scared of what we don't understand, right? And so if I tell you all about like, oh yeah, dragons are, dogs are scary, and you're going to be like, I don't understand dogs. As soon as you understand dogs and how they respond to, alpha position, it doesn't become as scary, right? And one thing I really appreciate with Fringe is some people are scared of CBD because of there's a void in their head and they're filling it with the misinformation they've already been fed. But you guys are tackling that by providing education for physicians, right? That's one of the things you are putting together. I don't know if it's done yet, but reason to sign up for the newsletter is there will be education about this very powerful tool, and it will help you not be scared. So if anybody listening is like, I'm nervous to tell my patients about CBD because, it's a fear-based thing. The solution to that is education. That is always the solution. So do you guys currently have education on there, or is that something that will be released in the future?
So right now we have sort of quote unquote 2 days of education. We have what's called our whole person health course, which is a 4.5-hour sort of framework on how we want to think about laying out the scope of the land when it comes to looking at inner body or inner world between body and mind connections, and outer world in your space and your environment and your relationship connections, and then ultimately how that is bound by your belief system. So we sort of do a grand introduction to those concepts. Here's the framework. Here's what we're going to keep coming back to. Here's what we really are passionate about at Fringe. And then sort of leading into the number one thing that we picked from was this idea that plants are medicine. And that's where we went into the CBD space very heavily. So we actually have a 6-hour cannabis science or endocannabinoid science course that's also available right now, right?
Yeah.
So the goal, and now we got a rower and firefighters coming down the block again.
Yeah, honorary rower. It's all scheduled. Exactly. So yes, the answer is that yes, you do have a lot of education available. So if anybody's nervous or doesn't quite understand what role it plays, you guys have the education. Because before I talked to Allison about it, Allison's the CEO of Fringe for everybody who's listening, and was a previous podcast guest a couple of months ago. I didn't even realize that we have these receptor sites. Like we know about nicotinic receptors and all these different receptor sites in our body, and I didn't realize that there are ones that play really well with. I can't. Endocannabinoids? Is that
endocannabinoids?
Yeah. Yep. Which, by the way, you hit that word in Scrabble, you are dominating.
Game over. Yeah. Game over. All of these words, Josh. I think part of the funniest thing when we were recording day one stuff as an inside joke to that stuff, I was like, I can't say anandamide. I can't say arachidinoglycerol. I can't say this word. I was like, give me the abbreviations for it. So it was like, just say AEA and 2AG. And I was like, cool, let's go back and cut out all those words and sort of like lip sync like an AEA or 2AG, like, or just block out my mouth altogether. I think you also like that, but that's a great point that you make. So yeah, we have these 2 days of courses. We're rolling out weekly newsletters to people with a different sort of flavor, research review, something clinical by me, a research review by Genevieve. We throw in some fun little things for people just for sort of following along as well. So I think that's a great place to start. We've had 5 this week. Coming up will be our 5th newsletter, and each one is chock full of information. When you sign up for the newsletter, there also is a special little area for healthcare providers who sign up and quote unquote join Fringe. And there's a bunch of blogs on the actual website as well, sort of going over the ideas or concepts for CBD and pain, CBD and sleep, and CBD and stress. But the other thing I think that is a little bit scary for people too, and I know that's a little scary for me as a physical therapist, is learning a new language on top of learning new information, right? I had never heard of the term pharmacokinetics before, but I'd also never heard of the term endocannabinoid system before. So, when you start diving into these new words and you're like, wow, how am I going to explain this to patients? It was a fun challenge, I think, from even a metaphor standpoint of like, how are we going to come up with metaphors? I think we beg, borrow, and steal and modify from a lot of the people who are already out there sort of doing it well, and, coming up with our own little twist on things that we've learned from the past. But yeah, it can be very intimidating. And I think like throwing out like, endocannabinoid system can be out of homeostasis in your body for a client. Right. It's like, whoa, That's a lot of things to
put that up on the
here.
clinic, on the windows to the clinic. Are you looking for endocannabinoid therapy consultation? Then we are.
Yeah.
Just enter here.
Yeah. But we do know that the endocannabinoid system is a communication system. I think that that's what we're sort of like harping on now, is that it might not be an actual system, standalone system like the respiratory system or the musculoskeletal system in a sense, because what we're seeing with the endocannabinoid system is that it shares processes or has been discovered in every single one of these other tracks, if you will. So for cell-to-cell communication, and one of the analogies that we use is the endocannabinoid system is really part of your relax and forget parasympathetic nervous system response, and to some degree, as well as getting cells to optimally communicate with each other. And I think a good analogy for even us today is, being in a crowded gym or in a loud gym, you and me wouldn't be able to talk at a normal level with each other, right? Even if we were here, we'd be talking, using our outdoor voices, even though we were inside potentially. And there are some times where that's okay, right? For context.
Yeah.
But now if me and you went out to coffee, and because we got so used to screaming at one another, me and you are sitting at a quiet Starbucks where people are studying and we're still screaming at the top of our lungs, that would sort of create a little bit of disruption. And I think the best way to sort of look at that endocannabinoid system is that when these neurotransmitters start overdoing it, right, or staying in sort of a sympathetic response or a fight or flight response, the endocannabinoid system's job is to basically come on in and be like, hey, you can be quiet now. You can go back to, the resting tone, because we don't need this much signaling, right? We don't need this much crosstalk communication.
So as soon as the fire truck pulls away from the library, the cannabinoids act as a librarian to say like, hey, let's return. It's okay to be excited, but let's return back to quiet, and we're going to move forward here.
Yeah. And I think that, because I think, and you brought it up, it's like, hey, the honorary firefighter truck outside, right? It's part of every podcast interview, right? That no one uses the bike and the rower all day, and it's right outside my little door here. And of course, like everyone uses the bike and the rower when you do a podcast. Listeners
of this podcast can assure you that my gardeners and their leaf blower are well in tune with the schedule of which I record.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because now the way that we can handle that, rather than maybe potentially getting all up in arms and thrown off kilter, is that our endocannabinoid system is responsible for lowering a cortisol response to also the same amount of stress that we're exposed to. So, hey, that firefighter thing, I might get stressed out about it the first time, like, oh my God, how this first time I ever did an interview, I can't believe it, firefighter truck. And then when it happens the 10th time, the 11th time, the 12th time, you're like, I can make a joke about it now because I'm sort of adapted to that response and sort of kind of keep the conversation going, right? And that's sort of adaptation. And the other big word that we use in the education system is really allostasis. And that's really, I think a better term for us to learn as providers and even clinicians over homeostasis. But that could be a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
Interesting. Yeah, so not just learning how this can help, but a whole new language, a whole new framework, and a new approach to new receptors that we may not have known beforehand. So no wonder it's so scary. No wonder it's so misunderstood, and no wonder it takes you guys 6 hours to educate us.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I read recently was the difference between calling something a supplement and a medicine, and it's a CBD supplement, right? Not a medicine. And the reason why no one really calls it a medicine is because it's going to take $10 million and another 10 years of research easily just for one person to end up going down that road.
You got to pay for a whole lot of PhDs at universities to get to medicine status, baby.
Totally, right? And then, even then, what we're realizing is that we're spending all this money, time, consideration to call something a medicine, and is it really helping with what it's supposed to say? So, keeping things as a supplement, you go into the wild west of the industry. It goes into the wild west of the industry, but I think that what we're hoping for at Fringe is we police ourselves. We still do that third-party testing, and then we hope that others sort of follow suit, and then the evidence gradually catches up as things become more and more legal and accepted.
That's awesome. So for the listener, again, this is Joe Lavacca. He's head of education for Fringe, which you can find at joinfringe.com. But I think the reason I wanted to have you on is you're in daily practice of you're down there with patients in the gym, getting them to the gym, doing the rehab with the weights and kettlebells. So you are our type of provider. And yet you still, because sometimes I feel like people go like, oh, that's that provider's a nutrition guy, or that one's a CBD guy. And you're doing the same version of care we are and going, hey, I see this as a great adjunct to what I'm already doing, which is what I hope everybody listens for. So once again, can you throw out the website just so they can find those courses and newsletter?
Yeah, best way to contact us or learn more about us, www.joinfringe.com.
Awesome. All right, Joe. Well, I'm going to say, let's do this again. Maybe I won't schedule the fire truck to drive by at that time.
Yeah, I'll do something maybe on like a nice Thursday or Friday morning with a cup of coffee for you next time.
There you go. And I would love to hear as you guys kind of get more people educated, like what are the issues that are coming up or that people are addressing with this? Because time is the factor. You just can't replace it, and it makes everything more accurate. Look at all the research around everything we do with our patients, like time made it all better. So I look forward to hearing that from you guys. Yeah. Well, on behalf of Dr. Joe Lavacca, this is Dr. Josh Satterlee saying, go out there, maximize your license, and live the life you dream of. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for checking out these videos. I hope they're useful. We'll cover things like rehab, exercise, business model, progressions, layout, everything else that helps you build a clinic. So if you're interested, you can click here, there, here, or anywhere to get more videos just like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon.